Hey folks, this is Last Breath Woodworks. I'm Josh. Welcome to my channel. In this video, we're going to be making some vases. Been kind of a special project for me, and there's a great story behind it. We'll get into that later. It all starts right there. What you see here is what's left of a truckload of oak firewood logs that I had delivered to my home last fall. They came from a timber harvest just a couple miles down the road. With the skyrocketing cost of heating fuel, my wife and I decided it was time to return to burning wood for heat. We like the heat that it gives better anyway. Well, we were in a big hurry, just trying to get everything cut and split and stacked in the woodshed so we had enough for winter. And when I came across a maple log, I really didn't think much of it, just cut it up with the rest of it. It was around Christmas that I had a piece of it in my hand, was about to throw it in the stove, and realized that it was curly maple. Highly figured curly maple at that. So throughout the winter, we picked out those pieces and set them aside for a future project. By the time springtime rolled around, I had a pretty nice pile built up. I checked the moisture on a few pieces and everything was just under 10%. So I knew it was time to make something out of these things. I picked out 4 pieces of the firewood and started the milling process on the joiner. They were pretty rough from being split, so the first few passes were a little heavier, a little over a 32nd of an inch on each pass. But as I started to smooth out, I made shallower and shallower cuts until I got a nice smooth surface on one side. At that point, I flipped them over and worked on the second side, making sure that I had a perfect 90-degree angle, nice and square, and 2 smooth flat surfaces to start with. This way I was ready to take them to the table saw and start cutting them into usable pieces. Alright, so off camera, I finished cutting up about 4 of those pieces of firewood and ended up getting a pretty nice bunch of stock out of them. I should have enough here for at least a couple vases. All the little pieces of the wood that were left over, the smaller corners and everything, I ripped down to 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch and then cross cut them into little cubes. And this is what I ended up with. Unfortunately, I forgot to change my blade out from a ripping blade to a crosscut blade, a finer blade, so they all had fuzzy edges. So each and every one of these had to have the edges sanded off clean, and that took me a few hours, but it gave me a good time to sit down and binge watch some videos. But I'm really happy with the quality. I mean, if you look at some of the curl and figure in there, I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous. I'm hoping that's showing up on the camera. But yeah, so glad this was rescued from the firewood pile. I ended up with enough material to make 3 vases. As you can see, I've got them in the forms already. Those are all just plastic containers, leftovers from yogurt, hand wipes, you name it. I try to keep any of that stuff on hand because they're all different sizes for different projects. As long as they're number 2 or number 5 plastic, they seem to work well. The advantage of this is I can hot glue different ones together, and when I'm done, just cut them off and throw them in the recycling bin. So all 3 of the vases have a solid wooden base, and 2 of them, the taller ones, have 4 vertical curly maple uprights with the wooden blocks in between them. The third one just has a sacrificial wooden core with blocks all the way around it. What's on top of those is just bamboo skewers that I cut up and CA glued to the top. This is to keep the blocks from floating in the epoxy, and if you don't do that, then they just rise to the top and you'll end up with a big gap of just solid epoxy at the bottom. Once I had all 3 of the vases topped off with epoxy, it was time to put them into the pressure pot. Now this is deep pour epoxy, so it takes a good 3 days to fully cure. So into the pressure pot they went, and 3 days later, I took them out to see what we were looking at. When I opened the pressure pot, my heart sank into my stomach. The epoxy had settled a good third of the way down into the molds. I'm guessing because it was so cold in my shop that the epoxy was thick and the air bubbles that were trapped in all those little cubes finally worked their way out. So I just made the best of it, mixed up another batch of epoxy with a complementing color, topped them off, put them back in the pot, and after 3 more days in the pressure pot, they were ready to go on the lathe. All right, folks, all joking aside, this project turned out to be a lot more challenging than I had originally anticipated. Now, figured woods are always more likely to chip and tear, and epoxy can be a struggle too, but all those little cubes were facing different directions, which means that I was cutting face grain, edge grain, and end grain all at the same time. For this reason, I decided to stick with strictly carbide cutters, taking very slow, shallow passes and cuts until I got the shape that I wanted. At that point, I proceeded to sand them down from 80 grit through 400, and then I put a steady rest on and cored out the insides and finished hollowing them out. Now, this is where the story takes a bit of a turn and gets the most interesting. About 3 or 4 months ago, I was recovering from a very serious health scare and was watching a lot of YouTube videos. During that time, I came across a channel that inspired me. So here's a shout out to you, Daniel, at Bearded Viking Woodworks. Not only did Daniel create great videos, but he built an amazing community of just the most wonderful people. Through a Facebook group page and frequent live chats that he holds, I have received so much support and inspiration from so many of the different members. Now, during one of the live chats, I posed a question asking if anyone in the group was good at designing logos, because when it comes to technology, I'm a dummy. Well, the next day, a wonderful woman named Kat reached out to me and offered to give me a helping hand. So for the next week or two, we shot ideas back and forth. She came up with designs. We tweaked them out a little bit. And now I have a couple beautiful logos that I can use for engraving on my products, for business cards, apparel. And she even did the little clip at the beginning of my video. Well, all the time and work and support that she showed for me, I had to give something back. So I offered to make her a vase. She told me her favorite colors were blue and purple, so that's what we went with. I'll try to get a couple pictures of what she made for me and post them on this video. Well, folks, they're finally done. Been a long journey and a few complications. We'll say mistakes were made, but also overcome. After a couple setbacks, they turned out really good. I'm happy. Few minor imperfections, but you pretty much have to pick them up and get them just in the right light to see them. So overall, the finished product was pretty good. Once I had them done, I sent pictures to Kat, let her choose the one she wanted out of the three, and she chose this one. So this one's getting packaged up and sent out shortly. So Kat, if you're watching, check your mailbox, it's coming. I probably should have used an epoxy coat and then sanded and polished on these, but all I had was deep pour and tabletop, which takes 3 days to cure, and then probably a couple more days before you can really polish it decent. And after the setbacks I had previously, I was running out of time, just wanted to get them done so I can move on to some other things. So I put spar urethane on them. I put them on a carousel, one at a time, and sprayed them as they were turning to get a nice even coats on them. I put 4 light coats on, and I used a semi-gloss because sometimes to me it seems that the high gloss, the reflections take away from the depth of the wood, so I kind of went that route. Well, I ran into one last setback with that too, because I did them in this order. This was the last one I did in the end of the night before I went to bed. And I left the garage door and a window cracked about 4 inches to keep some air movement going through. And I shut the lights off, and the next morning I came back and was devastated. This one was still sitting on the carousel, just sitting still, and it must have happened right after I went to bed. A moth landed on it and literally did 2 laps around it, crawling all over it, and just messed it up bad. So back on the lathe it went once it was dry, and I lightly sanded it all out, got the wing out, the little legs, all the tracks, and hadn't burned through the urethane, so I just gave it a couple light coats of shellac to get a nice finish back on. So this one got a little more shine than the other two, but they all look good. So I guess at this point, if you've made it this far in the video, I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe. Feel free to leave comments. If you got ideas for future projects, let me know. I'm always game to try something new. I mean, I've only been turning on the lathe for a few months and not a lot of time on it. So this is probably only my 3rd real project I've done on it. So I'm happy with it. I'll give some glamour shots at the end here and hope you enjoyed.